We have been following the life of George Washington by retracing the actual routes that he took as documented in his journals.
Wow, look who we came across. Can you tell me a little bit about the war and how things went?
Well, that's quite a story. How things went.
That is certainly a difficult question, even for George Washington. So perhaps we should review some of the events that led up to the War for Independence.
Right now we're in upstate New York.
Our story begins near Albany, New York.
We're on a bicycle trail across the whole state, from Albany to Lake Erie.
The Mohawk River was an important route of travel in colonial America.
This is Fort Clock on the Mohawk River Valley, established in 1750.
This area was well traveled and settled even prior to the French and Indian War. You might recall that Benjamin Franklin and others came to this area and made one of the earliest proposals for the colonies to unite. The Albany Plan of Union was accepted unanimously in 1754. It was not until the Boston Massacre in 1770 and the Boston Tea Party of 1773 that the relationship between England and the colonies began to turn violent. The shot heard round the world at Lexington Concord on April 19, 1775, marked the point when violence reached a level of epic proportions. On April 23, 1775, King George of England declared the colonies to be in rebellion, and the siege of Boston began. It is worth noting that the cannons used to attack the British were captured from British forces at Fort Ticonderoga, also in upstate New York.
There are many small communities, such as Schenectady, which I stopped at in order to assess what the efforts of the people might be in that area in support of this cause, because in '75, I was on my way to Boston. I had just taken command of the Continental Army, and I had to see what is the Continental Army. Now, I had gotten reports that there were some 20,000 Massachusetts had surrounded the British and in Boston. And that's quite a number. But what I needed to find out was how military are they? Are they real soldiers, or is just simply civilians who are outraged? And so all along the way, I was always taking an assessment of various communities, such as Schenectady, to see what resources they might be able to offer. What was the general feeling of the people in the area? Were they in favor of this revolution that looked like was coming about, or were they still loyal to the crown? So always I took assessments wherever I went.
That church was used in the Revolutionary War. It was built in 1750.
This is what we find so amazing about American history. We can follow the very same path taken by George Washington. We can see the very same buildings that he saw, perhaps while riding his horse. And we can do this on a bicycle.
This one was built in 1752. This is the site of Queen's Fort.
This fort was originally built in 1705 and served as the focal point for the community that developed around it. The Mohawk tribe of Indians was prevalent in this area, and they too became involved in the war with England. In addition to riding the same trails as George Washington, we can also listen to the same music. It is reported that this piece was one of his favorites, and we know that he stayed along the street just up ahead.
Some of these houses date back 300 years. This is the oldest house in the city. Built before 1700 by Hendrik Brewer, fur trader. Beautiful Schenectady.
After the battles at Lexington and Concord, we know the siege of Boston began. On May 10th, the Second Continental Congress met in Philadelphia. By mid-June, we had the Battle of Bunker Hill, and on June 5th, rebel forces captured Fort Ticonderoga. By the end of 1775, there had been attacks on British forts in Quebec and Montreal. The beginning of 1776 saw a rebel victory at Moores Creek Bridge. By March of 1776, the siege of Boston proved successful when the British evacuated. Things really began to change as the Declaration of Independence was adopted at just about the same time that 30,000 British troops arrived in New York. The next 6 months proved rather difficult for General Washington and his Continental Army.
The general hasn't had a victory since the end of August. In fact, he's been pushed off of Long Island, Manhattan, lost in Staten Island, got to Fort Lee just in time to look back across the Hudson and watch Fort Washington fall. Thank you very much. Greatly appreciated.
General Washington and his army were forced to retreat.
The Raritan River, of course, was a very important waterway, and as a matter of fact, we were more concerned with burning bridges on the Raritan to prevent the British from crossing.
This is one of the actual locations where the Continental Army burned a bridge in 1776. It has since been rebuilt. We will talk more about the cycling trail along the Raritan River in a few moments. In order to retreat from British forces, General Washington and his army came south along the Raritan and then had to cross the Delaware River into Pennsylvania. It just so happens there is a bicycle trail that follows this very same path. It is called the Delaware and Raritan Canal. It follows the path taken by George Washington on several occasions. The canal was built after the Revolutionary War. There was also a railroad built on part of the trail at a later date and then removed.